But before we do that, I'd like to thank our three speakers who've joined us today. One will be popping up shortly, and they're going to help us kickstart this conversation. I'm going to ask them their opinion on the top news stories, which should be showing on your screen right about now. Let's start with Rita Zaboni, the Managing Director of Middle East and North Africa Energetics. Rita, firstly, thank you very much for joining us. And secondly, which story would you choose from that list and why, please?
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's a pleasure to be here. So I think I would really love to focus on this clean tech investment bubble question mark. And really for me, I absolutely agree with the sentiment of the article, which basically is arguing that there isn't going to be a clean tech investment bubble this time around, right? And I do totally agree. I would really cite three reasons, one of which is really covered deeply in the article. Number one is this fundamental pricing issue, right? If you look at where we are today versus where we are, 10 to 15 years ago, we've really dropped with the prices of the renewable energy technologies, the clean energy technologies. The articles
plummet is a fair word, isn't it?
Plummeted, absolutely, yeah. I mean, the article cites solar. I mean, they talk about PV has fallen, so it's 28% lower than gas. It's an 89% decline in 10 years, with more cost drops to come, right? So it's a whole different ballgame in terms of the pricing. And that, of course, drives so much in terms of actual investment. What I would add as well that isn't focused as much in the article is really just in terms of research and development, R&D. It takes time. It takes time to actually see the fruits of R&D. So we saw a large investment about 10 to 15 years ago in clean energy technologies, and it takes time until we actually see those come into the market. So typically 10 to 20 years, in terms of from the basic early stage, applied stage R&D to actually seeing the fruits of that labor. You could see that actually if you look at, for example, LED lighting, solid state lighting, first invented in 1993. Not seeing really, hit the market in large numbers until now, very recently, right? So you do to see that lag, and you need that patience. And so I do expect in this decade to see kind of the fruits of that R&D. Hopefully, something with energy storage, for example, some kind of breakthrough solid state storage and those types of technologies.
Well, I'd hope with the momentum that we're seeing recently as well, that the lead time, if LEDs were to be released now, that 1993 was now instead, you would hope that overall timeline would be far shortened with the raising awareness that we've been having.
That's a really good point. Absolutely. I mean, climate change, carbon constrained world is now, it's just a reality, and everyone is accepting it in some level of another. Maybe some are not, but I think they'll get there. But I think if anything, what that COVID has shown us is if the global community is actually motivated to do something, they will actually get it done. And I think you're absolutely right. More and more, we're going to see an acceleration of that adoption. Absolutely.
And perhaps on the other side, when it comes to talent, because some of these emerging technologies and emerging markets as well, the talent just isn't quite there for them yet in terms of depth, but in terms of volume as well. And there is still this mismatch between where we need to go, jobs of the future, and where we're at now. And obviously, industry and academia are doing a lot of work on this and trying to marry those two worlds a bit more. Perhaps that will be a hindrance, and that will end up slowing that timeline to make where we have the acceleration from the mood and the sentiment, the realities of the talent and availability may end up cancelling that out. I guess we'll just have to see. Next up is Sahin, the CEO of Faradai. Which story grabs your eye today, please? And my apologies if I got your pronunciation incorrect.
No problem. That was pretty good. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
It is great to be here. Thanks for hosting us. I would love to mention in specific for decarbonizing the EU's, European Union's building stock, and especially digital energy technologies, the role of these digitization in the energy efficiency. So globally, there is a huge trend for Green New Deal, let's call it like that. European Union pioneers in net zero carbon emission technologies. EU has R&D calls, specific R&D incentives for next generation energy efficiency technologies for commercial stock as well as industry facilities. Of course, there are different technologies pushing this growth, like carbon capture, energy storage, electric vehicles, microgrids, and so on. But when we look at from the financial investment perspective, return on investment perspective, the energy efficiency technologies are the most feasible and fastest return technologies to invest. So here, the application and impact of digital technologies in commercial buildings and industrial facility energy efficiency, it's really important element for the mapping and exploring the next generation solutions and trends and regulations. In order to understand this, we need to look at the big perspective, the huge trends globally. We call it 4D plus E trends: decarbonization, deregulation, digitalization, and also decentralization, and finally electrification. So if you understand those big trends, big waves, you can surf on it. You can build viable business models, viable regulations on top of them.
Well, we're going to delve into that a little bit more because I want to hear a few more of your thoughts on the digital and tech side. Was that 4 Ds and an E? That was right, wasn't it?
Yes.
Four Ds and an E. Okay, great. We're going to come back to that. Thank you very much. And Guloren Toran, thank you very much for joining us as well. She is the General Manager of Advocacy and Communications at the Global CCS Institute. Are you still with us?
I am. And sorry, I had a little bit of an internet connectivity problem. Yes.
What would be your top story from that list that's been showing on the screen?
So if I can cheat, if I'm allowed to cheat, can I pick two very briefly? Yes. Because I think they kind of highlight the same theme for me. And those stories are Baker Hughes joins Arctic CCS project and BP plans largest hydrogen project. And I pick those stories because they're both going to be using carbon capture and storage to deliver, it underlines the validity of carbon capture and storage as a key transition technology, but also the fact that it's becoming also a huge business opportunity. So just to put it into perspective, Baker Hughes is planning to develop a 100 million ton storage facility in Arctic North Sea. And just to put that into perspective, to date, globally, we have stored around sort of 260 million tons. So just one facility can capture and storage 100 million tons of CO2. It's huge. Similarly, BP planning to build and develop a 1 gigawatt blue hydrogen facility in Teesside. I think it's going to be the largest clean hydrogen facility to be built. Equinor already has plans to build a 600 megawatt, again, a blue hydrogen facility in the UK. They're going to be using CCS to capture emissions from the hydrogen production, which we know at the end, hydrogen is a clean burning fuel. So I think both of these kind of stories to me highlight the fact that CCS is becoming, people generally reach out to me and say, oh, ask me, is it real? Is it happening? Yeah. It's very real. It's very happening. And there's kind of big investments going into it.
Arguably a bit later than it should have been at the scale that we've needed, but it's certainly picking up.
Exactly. Very much so.
All right, let's move on to the main topic of today, which is emerging tech for energy efficiency. Obviously, we've touched on that quite a bit already. At the moment, we have soon with a question mark. I think by the end of this conversation, it's going to have several exclamation marks next to that word. So why are we talking about this? Well, energy efficiency delivers more than 40% of the reduction in energy-related greenhouse gas emissions, GHGs to most of us, over the next 20 years, according to the IEA. And we are far behind where we need to be. So 40%, 20 years. Everyone is going to get a chance, speakers and listeners alike, to share their views on that shortly in our survey questions. So please keep your keypads at the ready. But let's move on to some details on that. So Rita, if I may start with you, please. Investments in new energy efficiency buildings, equipment, vehicles, EVs, obviously, are expected to decline in 2020. This is obviously the reverse of what we were aiming for. We don't have 2020 figures yet, and that's of course where we had this huge shift in sentiment, so we don't quite know what that's going to look like, but based on the figures we do have, and the economic growth is falling by an estimated 4.6%. The IMF has said that we've got a slow, arduous uphill journey out of it, but it's not saying that we're in the worst depression in nearly a century. So things are certainly going in the right direction. How would you want to see capital allocation being boosted in 2021 towards these greener markets, buildings, equipments, and EVs?
Right. So, I mean, I think number one thing is an acknowledgement that from the corporate and the market side, that you have a carbon constrained world, and that is the reality that we are now increasingly facing. Right. So, I think the investment is something that they'll be looking at with that kind of horizon, in mind. So now, what do they want to then invest in terms of the clean energy technologies? Well, it just depends on their level of business. So for the building side of things, there are energy efficiency improvements, as you've been talking about, to be made for buildings across the world. And it is the lowest cost, kind of source of energy, you could say. And then on the transportation side, if we really look at the system's perspective on things, I really am a proponent of really electrify everything, right? So you green the electricity supply, which you see, developments taking place around the world, large scale, utility scale, solar and wind projects in particular. You see the small scale rooftop solar also happening. But then also on the other side, if you have an electrified transportation fleet and vehicles as well, now you have a potential place for energy storage, and you could play with that interaction in terms of supply and demand. And you see it with the automakers, the plans that they're making, pronouncements, some of the automakers now shifting completely away from internal combustion engines. So,
is the speed there? Because we've all seen these new headlines, and they're very, very reassuring, and some of them are very bold as well, and certainly signaling a completely new direction. But the timelines are still a decade, 7 years, 12 years. Those are still the sorts of timelines that we're looking at. Are you confident that the capital allocation to getting these sorts of projects off the ground, are you confident that they are there? Or are we at an LED situation, LED light situation, or is the capital truly there to accelerate?
I think so. I mean, I think it's there. It does take time. You're absolutely right. It does take time, for these kinds of investments to move. But I'll give you one example in the Gulf region, right? There's a new development which is being done by the Red Sea Development Company. They're developing a new tourist destination. It'll be a number of hotels, on the Red Sea. And that development, they're trying to make it basically as clean as possible. They're going to have a clean energy supply through solar and wind. And then they're trying as much as possible to have their entire mobility solution be based around electric vehicles. So, that's a huge investment right there. And that's an example of the reality of actual companies and investment actually coming into clean tech starting today.
And what about the argument about batteries? Because whenever the growth of electric markets is mentioned, and the idea is to move towards a circular economy, this point about batteries is brought up. What's being done to mitigate that? Because in time, as concerns build, surely that will start to deter some investors. They can't see how that loop is closed, and may end up facing some negativity from consumers or stakeholders as well. So what's happening on the battery side to make sure that's as energy efficient and environmentally friendly as possible once they're done?
Right. So with batteries, I mean, there are new chemistries under development. So that's number one. So lithium ion is the battery of choice right now, but it likely will not be, it may not be in 10 years or so. We'll have to see how the developments come into play in that time period. But I think in terms of the recycling, the waste, the disposal, I think those, and also I should say material supply is also a critical issue as well. But those are things.
The ethical sourcing of that.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, those are things I think, as the market matures, as the market develops, there will be incentives in place for, corporates and for governments to address all those issues. I think they are being addressed slowly, but surely over time. But it's just, it's going to go hand in hand, right? So we're not going to put the cart ahead of the horse, so to speak.
In terms of capital allocation, it feels like more is being spent on the upstream of the EVs than it is on the management of the waste. Guloren, Rita's just mentioned something about time and schedules and things taking time, which I'm sure you really empathize with when it comes to CCS and how we're seeing that really pick up now. Can you run us through the carbon capture and storage side of things? Because by 2040, 350 gigawatts of energy electricity capacity, is going to be equipped with CCS, according to the IEA. But we're nowhere near that at the moment, are we really? So how to fill that gap at the same time as the gap is being filled in so many other markets? There's so much demand.
Indeed, we at the Global CCS Institute track, we've got a database of all CCS facilities, either in existence or under development. And currently we have 26 facilities operating in different industries, including power generation. But in order to meet the IEA targets of the sustainable development scenario of the IPCC 1.5 degree, we need to get from having 26 facilities to some 2,000 facilities by 2050. So a scaling up of 100 is needed. So
may I just ask, when was the first CCS, when was the first of those 26 built?
In the 1970s in the US. So US leads the scoreboard in terms of both the existing and the number of facilities under development. In Europe, the first facility was built in 1996 in Norway. That's the Sleipner facility. And we also have some 30, I think 4 or 35 facilities that are in development in the pipeline as we speak at the moment. So 26 in operation. I think a cumulative, we call the pipeline of 66 facilities, but still from 26, we need to get to 2,000, which is quite a dramatic kind of scaling up is needed.
And in terms of the volume of that 2,000, what sort of volume of?
We're talking about roughly 5 gigatons of CO2 being captured and stored by 2050. And you've alluded to the power industry. I mean, in the past, 10 years ago, CCS was very much thought of as a technology to decarbonize power generation. I think what's changed since then is, and I'll come to the power in a minute, but in addition to the power industry, we're now understanding better the versatility of CCS and the fact that we need and we can use CCS, in fact, to decarbonize what we call hard to abate industry, which industries like cement and steel, which people don't realize actually account for roughly 20% to 25% of global CO2 emissions. And actually we call these industries hard to abate because, and I agree with Ridah in terms of electrifying to the extent we can, but electrifying is not, we can't resolve hard to abate emissions from hard to abate sectors by electrifying, because that's the source of energy is not the big problem. It's the chemical processes. Like in cement, where the process is just the limestone, the input, and the chemical reaction produces CO2. So carbon capture and storage is very much needed to address emissions from these industries. But also we now know that carbon capture and storage can be used to produce clean hydrogen, hence the BP investment that I referred to. And finally, we understand from the IPCC 1.5 degree report, that we will need to also remove emissions, historic emissions that are already in the atmosphere. So in addition to mitigating our emissions as much as possible, there will be historic emissions, or there will be sort of sectors like aviation, which we can't reduce to zero. So we'll start to, and carbon capture is a way of doing that. It's a technological way of doing that. When we look specifically into power generation, we see a big role for CCS or an important role for CCS. So obviously renewable costs have come down dramatically, solar by 90%, kind of wind by sort of some maybe 50, 60%, which is fantastic news. But one of the issues with renewables is they're great when the sun shines and where we've got wind, but when it doesn't happen, potentially, for example, when we saw in Texas, we need power plants that can, this is what are technically called dispatchable, which basically means that one can turn on and off at will. Oh
no, you're back. You're back.
Sorry. And power plants, gas or coal plants equipped with CCS enables that capability. So we've got very low carbon generation, which we can turn on and off, which becomes even more important as we have more renewables in the system.
Just before we go to a survey question, Toran, I just want to ask, which countries, if you had to choose top 3, top 5, which countries would you say are you most hopeful about making the progress required in the next 5 years or so? this is obviously a global issue. There's multiple nations looking at this, but where should we focus our attention? Okay, I think Guloren's left us for now. Can we have the survey question up, please? And we will look at this while Guloren sorts out some tech issues. Right. So this is for everyone, listeners and speakers alike, to vote on, please. We'd really like to hear your thoughts. The IEA recently warned that the global improvements in energy efficiency have been declined since 2015, obviously not the direction we wanted to be going in. So how worried should we be? Should we be extremely worried? A little, it'll pick up, no need to panic, or are we on track and actually everybody just needs to calm down? So it'd be really great to get your thoughts on that. The fact that it's been declining since 2015 hasn't been helped by the recent COVID crisis. So we'll see what the numbers come out for last year after everything that's happened. But the energy intensity is expected to improve by 0.8% in 2020, which is roughly half the rate of 2019. On a longer term basis, and possibly this is the most critical point, because there are going to be global disruptions over the years up to 2050, and we'll have to deal with those. The critical point is that overall, this is well below the level needed to achieve our global climate and sustainability goals. So just give you a few minutes to vote on that. And Sahin, if I may pick your brains on how your 4Ds and your E apply to everything that we've heard so far. I think there are some very natural inroads to that, and it'd be good to hear how you would apply those.
Yeah, great. So yeah, we talked about the 4D and E trends, all the digitization, and electrification and so on. They sound really good, really optimistic on the paper. However, there is a huge gap in this transformation, and I want to focus on this gap and the solution of that.
Okay.
This is the lack of a flexible, interoperable, data-driven, AI-powered platforms in the commercial buildings and industrial facilities. The intersection of prop tech and smart grid is totally empty. We have to overcome the problem of legacy systems, vertical, closed, hardware dependence, SCADA automation, asset management systems in the huge facilities, industrial and commercial building portfolio. Because if we target this gap and solve this problem, the data-driven intelligence, the transformative effect of a big data, cloud, AI, IoT, and blockchain, we can unleash that power to reduce the energy cost, the OPEX at the facilities, which corresponds to a huge cost when you compare all the cost of a building in its own value chain, its own life cycle. So when you look at the adoption of the IoT data analytics technologies in different domains like telecom, finance, utilities, and so on, the energy ecosystem, the facilities is kind of lagging. You know, there is a huge opportunity in terms of business models, in terms of new startup ideas, and in terms of the balancing the grid. So sensors, smart meters are getting cheaper and cheaper. They are getting commodity. And as the data volume increases exponentially, the sensor data in the physical world, the complexity, the uncertainty also increases. So there is a quandary here. We need to approach this problem, this quandary, in terms of software point of view, not infrastructure point of view. I'm talking about feasible implementation of IoT and data analytics in the energy efficiency. From
Ridah,
sensor
can I
data
just
to
ask,
predictive
Ridah,
analytics.
do you feel from your side, Ridah, that this is being done? Because what Sahin is saying, it sounds like a lot of low-hanging fruits, and this has been, some of them are low-hanging fruits, and this has been known for years and years and years. Do you feel like, Ridah, that this is being done on the ground enough? Are you seeing much of this happening, or enough of this happening?
Not enough just yet. I absolutely agree, though. It is critical, it is important, but at this stage, a lot of it is happening. You know, we're not yet at the AI stage, you know, across the board, you know, actually leveraging that big data. It is starting. So the low-hanging fruits, especially if we talk industrial scale, you talk about things like ISO 50001, the energy management system approach. So you have now a proper approach to energy management, and you're going to save a lot of energy and of course, a lot of carbon just with that kind of low-hanging fruit. And then we're starting to see part of that approach is now you're looking at the data, right? When in the past you would not look at the data at all. Now you're actually looking at trends, you're looking at opportunities to save energy just with simple changes in your operational, and you're going to see that come out of the data. The next step is to really automate that and actually now have it be part of your day-to-day and not need as much human intervention, but to have it be part of a smarter system, an AI system. And so it is happening. You're seeing large investments in the US, for example, institutes around the idea of smart manufacturing to leverage sensors and AI and IoT trends, right?
And of course, you're saying about the next step. Well, next steps require momentum. They require a push. And I think if we see the survey answers, we'll start to get an idea of how much of a push there is. If we could bring up the answers. Extremely. Okay, so there's enough of a push from our listeners and speakers to say that actually, yes, we certainly do need this. Sahin, do you see those survey answers? Do you feel that reassured that there'll be much more appetite the appetite is growing, it's already strengthening, we know that, but it needs to go so much further, and perhaps education as well on things like AI platforms. Do you think that we start seeing progress this year? If you had a wish list by December, what would you like to see in this space, Sahin?
Yeah, there are huge, I think, need for government support and incentive in order to unlock, speed up the acceleration in these kind of business models, because it is a pure financial play. When you look at from the bottom-up approach, the high-level approach, if there are necessary and enough incentives for private sector to invest in energy services companies, energy performance contract models, and also necessary technology companies who provide measurement verification tools, energy performance analysis tools, the landscape itself can accelerate this transition without any external push. So we need to establish the necessary environment for all the stakeholders of this big picture, the NGOs, academy, startups, private sector, and most importantly, government. Government should be leading this energy efficiency transformation, starting from their own facilities, infrastructures, because when we look at different government facilities in all around Middle East, Europe, and also different geographies, government buildings have at least around 20-25% energy efficiency, energy saving potential with just really small actions, really low-hanging fruits there. So what we need to do is lead by example, starting from government, then build the necessary environment, then just enable and empower private sector to scale these efforts.
Especially as perhaps this is too much for generalization, but especially as in quite a few countries, government buildings are the oldest buildings, the most esteemed buildings, the one with the greatest history and so on. So the need for that level of efficiency is so much greater as well. Just before we wrap up, I want to ask a quick rapid fire question to you both. And the options are, nothing will come up on the screens, just the three of us. The options are yes, no, and maybe. So my question is, are you confident that energy efficiency targets will be reached by 2050? Ridah, yes, no, or maybe?
No.
Sahin?
Wanna be optimistic? I'm gonna say maybe.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. So clearly a lot of work left to do, a lot of effort needed on the digitalization side and the technology side as well, that still isn't being harnessed as quickly as possible, well, as quickly as it could be really. But as a main theme through this is that it takes time. Number one is awareness, number two is creating that momentum, and number three is acknowledging the fact that it does take time, as our LED light example certainly highlighted. Both of you, thank you very much for joining us. I'd also just like to add to our listeners that we have an intelligence briefing that is now being released every Wednesday. All the details are on Twitter and LinkedIn, and the insights and some of the key details and survey analysis of what we think about those results will be in there as well. So please, on Twitter and LinkedIn, every Wednesday at noon, sign up and have that straight to your inbox. Thank you very much, Sahin. Thank you very much, Ridah, for joining us, and Guloren, wherever she may be in the digital space lost. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.